The kitchen faucet had been dripping for 6 months, but tonight the sound was louder. Or maybe Atsubege was just more tired than usual. Tired in her bones, tired in her lungs, tired in her soul. She sat at the scratched formica table, her head in her hands, surrounded by a battlefield of unpaid bills and a single stubby pencil. The heating bill was overdue. Again. The electric would follow. Her last check from the motel had bounced, and the meat plant had cut her shifts without warning. They said she could come in for weekend overages, 4-hour windows that didn't even cover the gas to get there. Her hands smelled like bleach and ground beef. She hadn't eaten all day. Behind her, the thin metal walls of the trailer groaned as the wind moved across the mesa. Atsa reached for her cup of instant coffee. It was lukewarm bitter, but it tricked her body into feeling like she was still functioning. A cough broke the silence. She turned. Her son Kane stood at the doorway to their tiny shared bedroom, one hand rubbing sleep from his eyes, the other gripping his worn-out fleece blanket. "Mom, you still up? Go back to bed, baby," she said gently. "It's not even 4. You okay?" She smiled without feeling it. "Just thinking." Kane didn't move. "I can't sleep when you're out here like this." "I'm fine, Connie. Really. Just tired." He crossed the room in a few quiet steps and sat opposite her, careful not to bump the stack of mail. His face was still round at the edges, the last trace of boyhood holding on like dew in the desert. He looked so much like her father, in serious eyes, stormy and soft all at once. "I heard Mr. Benali's son got a job at the gas station in town." "Maybe I could," Noatsa said, too fast, too hard. Kane flinched. She softened. "Your job is school. School don't pay for propane." She looked away, blinking fast. "I know." A long silence stretched between them. Atsa listened to the trailer's hum, the groan of the walls, the distant rattle of an old fridge, the wind like a breath too heavy to let out. Kane reached for one of the envelopes. "What if I go live with Auntie Elba for a while? Stop." "I'm just saying it'd be one less," I said. "Stop." The words snapped harder than she meant. Kane froze. His jaw clenched like it wanted to be older than 15. Atsa stood and walked to the sink, splashing her face with cold water, gripping the edge of the counter until the white-hot ache behind her eyes faded to something dull. She hated this. Hated having to be the wall he leaned on while her own legs shook. "I can handle this," she said softly, not turning around. "I know," Kane said. "But I see you." She exhaled slowly, then turned. "Get some sleep. I have to be up in 30 minutes." He nodded and walked back to the room without another word. She sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. The trailer smelled faintly of bleach sweat and desert dust. Atsa looked at the calendar. Payday wasn't for another 4 days. Her gas tank was below a quarter. She would have to walk to the diner tomorrow, or maybe ask for a ride again. Pride, she knew, didn't pay bills, but she was running low on that too. The knock at the door made her jump. It was too early for anyone to be up. Too early for anything good. She crossed the room cautiously, pulling back the curtain. No one. Just the wind. Then she saw it. A large cream-colored envelope was taped to the door. Heavy stock paper, the kind that smelled expensive. The name printed across the front was hers. Atsubege. She opened the door and grabbed the envelope, heart pounding. Back inside, she turned it over in her hands. There was no return address, just a seal, Kensington and Chi Estate Law, Albuquerque, NM. Her fingers shook as she broke it open and pulled out the letter. Atsa squinted at the fine type, trying to focus through the headache hammering behind her eyes. Dear Ms. Bigay, we are writing to inform you that you have been named the sole beneficiary of the estate of Nelly Tsosi, deceased October 3rd of this year. The room went still. Atsa dropped into the chair. Nelly Tsosi. She hadn't heard that name in decades. Her mother had spat that name like it was poison. That woman isn't family, Sani used to say. She chose a white man over her own blood. Atsa's memory flashed an old woman with long silver braids and gentle hands brushing her hair, whispering a lullaby in Dine Bizad. She must have been 5, maybe 6. She kept reading. The estate includes real property located in Shiprock, New Mexico. We request your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience. Shiprock. She felt dizzy. The room tilted for a moment like the floor had become sand. Mom Kane stood in the doorway again. She looked up at him, the letter crumpled in her hands. My grandmother died, she said. I didn't know you had a grandmother. I didn't either, not really. He walked over and sat beside her. What's that? She left me something. A house. Land. Where Shiprock. Kane blinked. Wait, like by the Shiprock. That's what it says. He grinned a little. You gonna be rich? She snorted. Probably just a shack and a pile of debt. Watch it be full of rattlesnakes and back taxes. Kane picked up the envelope and peered inside. There's a card. Atsa opened it. Inside was a plain note, handwritten. Atsa, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. This land belongs to you now. I hope it brings you peace. But there's more here than you expect. Come. Walk through it. Look close. Nelly. Atsa read it 3 times. She felt something stirring in her chest. Not hope. Hope was for people who didn't live paycheck to paycheck. But maybe curiosity. Maybe memory. Maybe something heavier. She stood slowly, brushing off her hands. You're taking time off work? Kane asked. She nodded. I don't have the gas, the food, or the time. But we're going anyway. He smiled. Can I come? Atsa looked at him. The only thing she'd ever done right in her life. Yes, she said. You're coming. They stood together in the silence of the trailer, the first soft rays of dawn spilling across the floor. The wind pressed gently against the walls, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried. Atsa didn't know what waited for them in Shiprock, but she knew one thing. She was going. Some roots don't rot. They just wait to be remembered. The smell hit her first. Sagebrush diesel dust baked into pavement, the scent of northern New Mexico in early November. The 2-lane road unspooled ahead of them in a long, dry ribbon as the truck rattled north through the valley. Atsa gripped the wheel with both hands. Kane sat in the passenger seat, arm out the window, face tilted to the sun, like he could soak up answers from the sky. They hadn't said much since leaving Gallup that morning. Not out of tension, just out of something heavier wonder maybe, or the silent space between uncertainty and the truth. The rental truck's engine hummed beneath her feet. It wasn't the first time she'd driven this road, but it felt different now, like something was waiting out there, something bigger than money, or land, or even blood. Do you remember anything else? Kane asked finally. Atsa kept her eyes on the road. Not much. I was really little. You said she gave you pine nuts. A ghost of a smile flickered at her lips. Yeah. Crystallized. Sweet like candy but earthy. She kept them in a tin. She called me Atsa Daushash, eagle and bear, because I wouldn't sit still, but I never cried. Kane grinned. That fits. She exhaled slowly, trying to reach backward in her mind, through time and silence and all the walls her mother had built. There were moments blurred images of a long braid over a denim shoulder, the rustle of skirts, the smell of firewood, and fry bread. A lullaby hummed in Dîner Bizade, while someone wove her hair into thick braids before bed. But it all ended one night. A memory she couldn't quite name, just the echo of her mother's voice, sharp and full of steel. That woman is not our family. She chose them over us. Them. Atsa had never known who them was. Only that the next morning they moved out of her aunt's house near Crown Point and never spoke of Nellie again. She must have had money, Kane said, peering at the folded map in his lap. To leave behind land. A house. People don't just hand that over. Maybe it's nothing, Atsa replied. Old house too far gone. Probably can't even open the doors without a crowbar. Kane didn't look convinced. Then why'd she write that letter? Atsa didn't answer. She didn't know. They passed a faded sign that read Shiprock 12 miles in peeling white paint. The sacred rock itself loomed in the distance, sharp, jagged, ancient, like a claw reaching up from the earth. It always made her feel small and reverent. The Dene called it Tse Bitai, the rock with wings. Her mother used to tell her it had carried the people to safety once long ago. Now it felt like it was calling her back. They pulled off the main road and onto a gravel path marked by a rusted cattle gate and a handmade wooden sign that had long since lost its lettering. Weeds pushed up through the gravel, and the tires thudded over every dip and rut. After about a mile, the brush gave way, and there it was. The house. Atsa let the truck roll to a stop. It rose from the dry earth like it had grown there. Adobe walls faded to a sun-bleached tan. Wooden vigas jutting from beneath the eaves, and a low wall that framed what had once been a garden, now tangled with dry thistle and tumbleweed. One section of the roof sagged, and a shutter hung at an angle from a second-floor window. But even through the decay, the house had presence. Not beauty command. Kane whistled low. This place is huge. Atsa turned off the ignition and sat still, both hands on the wheel. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel empty. She looked at him. He pointed toward the upstairs window. I don't know, it's been waiting. The wind picked up scattering sand across the yard and sending the dry branches of a piñón tree scraping softly against the house. It did feel like something was watching. Atsa got out slowly, her boots crunching on the gravel. The air was colder than she expected, clear and sharp, full of space. The land stretched out around them, endless and quiet. It wasn't just remote. It was alone. Who do you think lived here with her? Kane asked, stepping around the truck and looking up at the house. I don't know. Maybe no one. Maybe just her. They walked to the front door together. The paint was peeling from the frame, and an old turquoise necklace, a single broken strand, hung nailed above the lintel, like a blessing or a warning. Atsa paused. Tucked behind the shutter, just as the lawyer said, was a small envelope with her name written in careful cursive. Inside was a single brass key and another note. Atsa, if you're here, then you're ready. Be patient with the house. It remembers everything. Nellie. She held the key in her hand. It was heavier than it looked. The lock groaned as she turned it, and the door opened an inch before catching on something inside. She pushed harder. Dust and air and time poured out all at once, rich with age warmth, and something like perfume left too long in the sun. Inside the house was dim. Sunlight filtered through high windows streaked with grime. The floor was tile covered in footprints long since faded, A wide hallway stretched toward a sitting room filled with ghostly shapes draped in white cloth. Kane stepped in behind her and whispered, "This is like a movie." Atsa didn't respond. She took 3 steps forward, then paused. There was a photograph on the wall, framed in old wood slightly crooked. She reached up and straightened it, then stared. Kenny Rogers, smiling arm slung over the shoulder of a woman with long silver braids. Nellie. She wasn't standing off to the side like a servant or assistant. She stood beside him, eyes warm, expression proud, like she belonged. More photos lined the hall. Nellie at a dining table arranging flowers in a glass vase. Nellie walking beside a black horse. Nellie laughing with someone she didn't recognize. And Kenny in all of them. He lived here, Kane asked. Maybe. Or maybe this was her place. Atsa followed the hallway, taking in more details, Navajo rugs on the walls, shelves filled with pottery and baskets. Everything layered as if someone had curated both worlds, theirs and his, into a single rhythm. They reached the living room. Light poured through tall, arched windows. The furniture was all covered in sheets, but beneath one she could see the outline of a leather couch. On the far wall hung a set of gold records. Kane moved toward the fireplace and picked up a photo from the mantel. Mom. She joined him and looked. This one was in color. Kenny sat with a guitar in his lap, and behind him, hand on his shoulder, stood Nellie. She looked happy, like she wasn't cleaning someone else's house, like this was hers. Atsa's throat tightened. Her fingers curled around the photo frame until her knuckles went white. Kane glanced at her. You okay? She nodded slowly. Yeah. She couldn't finish the sentence. The wind outside shifted. Somewhere in the back of the house something creaked. They both turned toward the sound. Kane's voice was quiet. Thought this place was supposed to be empty. Atsa set the photo down gently. I think she said we haven't seen the half of it. This house has been quiet for a long time, but it hasn't forgotten who it's waiting for. The screen door groaned as it swung open behind them. A gust of dry wind swept across the threshold, carrying with it a whisper of dust and the faint scent of juniper and stone. Atsa paused, her hand still hovering over the picture frame. Kane glanced back toward the sound that had creaked through the back hall. Was that a door, he asked? Could be the house settling, she said, though her voice betrayed her. The kind of creak they'd heard wasn't the tired sigh of old wood. It was sharp, specific, like a latch giving way. They stood still, listening. The wind outside quieted. Inside, the silence grew thicker. Atsa turned slowly and walked toward the hallway that split off past the kitchen. Kane followed close behind. The corridor was dim, the windows narrow and high. Along one wall hung more photos, this time of family gatherings, cookouts, a garden in bloom. Nellie stood in all of them, smiling in the background, sometimes beside Kenny, sometimes alone. It was strange. The way she was always there, always just out of focus, but never invisible, like a quiet heartbeat in the house. The hallway ended at a heavy wooden door. Atsa pressed her hand to it. It was cool and smooth. She turned the handle. It led to a wide dining room, long, low-ceilinged, with a massive table stretching nearly the full length of the room. The chairs were covered in white sheets, but the carved wood arms peeked through. Dust floated in the slanted sunbeams like spirits caught mid-dance. On the far wall, a sideboard held silver serving dishes, some tarnished black, some still gleaming beneath the dust. A Navajo woven table runner rested across the top, faded but beautifully preserved. What do you think this place is worth? Kane asked softly. I don't know, Atsa said, but that's not what I'm thinking about. What then? She stepped closer to the table and laid her hand on the runner. I'm wondering who sat here, what they talked about, why she kept all of it like this. Frozen. Kane nodded slowly, walking the perimeter of the room. Feels like it's been waiting. Atsa turned to the tall double doors on the east side of the dining room. They opened into the kitchen. The air changed the moment they stepped inside. It was cooler, drier, and smelled faintly of rust and dried herbs. The kitchen was enormous commercial-style ovens, double sinks, industrial refrigerators, now long unplugged. The pantry door creaked open to reveal rows of ancient canned goods, the labels faded to sepia. A small window above the sink looked out toward the back of the property. It's like she just walked away one day, Kane said. She probably did, Atsa murmured. On a hook beside the stove hung a faded apron. It was sun-bleached, nearly translucent in spots, the edges fraying. Atsa reached out and touched it. Her breath caught. A smell, ginger-sweet and earthy, rose from the fabric. And with it a memory slammed into her. She was 6, sitting on a counter. A woman with silver braids held out a tiny square of candied ginger. It's strong, the woman had said, but it's good for you. Atsa had made a face and the woman laughed. That laugh, musical and soft like it belonged in a lullaby. Her grandmother. Her real one. Tears stung her eyes, sudden and hot. She turned away from Kane, who was flipping through a stack of yellowed recipe cards on the counter. She made fry bread, he said with a grin. Like a lot. She probably made it for him, Atsa said, voice thick. And everyone else who passed through here. She made it for me too, Kane said. Atsa looked up. When I was little, that one time we stayed at Auntie Elba's, there was a lady there, braided hair, quiet voice. She gave me some. I didn't know her name. Atsa swallowed hard. She must have visited Elba, she whispered. Kane looked down at the card in his hand. Why didn't your mom ever tell you about her? Atsa didn't answer. She didn't have one. Only that Sani Begay had cut off her mother like cutting loose a sinking weight, and never looked back. They moved from the kitchen into a hallway lined with cabinets. At the far end was a narrow staircase that curved upward. We haven't seen the upstairs, Kane said, already climbing. The second floor opened into a wide landing with 5 doors. Each room was different. One was done in blues and whites, ocean paintings on the walls, ship wheels, a model lighthouse on a shelf. Another had a cowboy-themed saddles, spurs, even a boot-shaped lamp. They opened door after door, finding neatly made beds, stacked quilts, faded curtains. Everything untouched, like guests were expected at any moment. At the far end of the hall, the last room was different. The walls were plain, no theme, just soft green paint peeling at the edges. A twin bed with a handmade quilt, a single nightstand, a small bookshelf with worn spines. It felt lived in but not curated. This was hers, Atsa said before she even crossed the threshold. Kane was quiet behind her. Atsa walked to the nightstand and opened the drawer. Inside was a single photo in a cracked leather frame. A woman younger holding a baby. Her mother. And her. Atsa sat slowly on the edge of the bed. She stared at the photo for a long time. She kept this, she whispered. She never stopped loving you, Kane said. Or Mom. The weight of that hit her harder than the money. Harder than the house. All those years thinking Nellie had abandoned them when it had been the other way around. Kane crouched by the foot of the bed and opened a cedar trunk. Inside were bundles of letters tied with twine, photo albums, Newspaper clippings. A journal. Atsa picked it up. The leather was soft with age. She opened to a page at random. March 15th, 1992. Kenny came back from his tour today. He looked tired. I made him blue corn soup and he told me stories about New York. He asked about Maya. I showed him her school photo. He said she has strong eyes. It breaks my heart that she doesn't know me. But Sani made her choice. I have to respect that, even if it kills me. Atsa's breath hitched. Kane sat on the floor, flipping through photos. She kept all of it, he said. Everything. The sun dipped lower through the west-facing window. The shadows stretched across the floor, and the room felt heavier with every breath. We've barely scratched the surface, Atsa murmured. This place has layers. What do we do? Kane asked. She stood slowly looking around the room. We keep looking. Back downstairs, they returned to the hallway near the kitchen. Atsa noticed a door they hadn't tried. It was tucked behind a narrow curtain. She pushed it open. Stairs descended into darkness. Kane flicked on the flashlight on his phone. Basement, Atsa nodded. The beam lit only a few feet ahead, the steps vanishing into shadow. She took the first step, then another, and another. Something creaked below. Not the house, something else, no. Deliberate. Waiting. Kane swallowed. I don't think this is just a basement. Atsa stared into the dark. She couldn't see what waited, but she felt it. Neither of them said a word. They just kept walking down. The wall opened like it had been waiting for someone with her blood. The air changed the moment they stepped into the basement. It was cooler, sharper, dry in a way that caught at the back of Atsa's throat. The stone walls were smooth, not cinder block like she expected, but plastered adobe over thick masonry. Old wood beams lined the ceiling, each dark with age, some bowed with time. The stairs groaned under their weight as they descended, and every step deeper felt like peeling back the skin of the house. Kane moved the flashlight slowly, the beam sweeping over a narrow hallway that opened into a larger room. Boxes were stacked neatly along one side, and a single overhead bulb hung from a long frayed cord in the center. Atsa pulled the chain. A brittle hum filled the space, then warm light spilled over the room, yellow and flickering. The basement wasn't a storage dump like most. It was intentional. A desk sat against the far wall, old but polished. Shelves lined the room, books, ledgers, labeled filing boxes. Everything was organized like someone had been working here until the day they couldn't anymore. Kane drifted toward the back corner where an old metal cabinet sat, its paint peeling, but its drawers locked tight. There's something weird over here, he called. Atsa crossed the room, stepping carefully. It looked like a regular bookcase at first. 6 rows of hardbacks, most of them worn. Some were in Dine Bizad, some in English. One shelf was entirely music-related biographies, sheet music, old fan magazines. But there was something off about the spacing. The middle shelf had 2 books pushed tightly against the left side, and one alone on the right. Through the Years, The Life of Kenny Rogers. Atsa's fingers hovered. Then she reached for it. The second she pulled it from the shelf, the air shifted. With a quiet click, the back wall of the shelf creaked forward. Kane stepped back. What? The entire bookcase slid forward just an inch, then pivoted smoothly to the right on a hidden hinge, revealing a dark passageway behind it. Atsa felt her pulse pound behind her ears. Kane stared. Secret door, seriously looks like it. Who has secret doors in their basement? Apparently, your great-grandmother. The air behind the passage was even colder. Atsa leaned in, saw another hallway shorter, more narrow. At the end of it, a steel door rounded at the top like a vault. Atsa's breath caught. She walked toward it slowly, each step echoing softly. The door was matte gray, seamless, with no handle. In the center, just above waist height, sat a small, square scanner, glass and metal. Atsa stared at it. A memory stirred Nellie's note upstairs, the one from the envelope on the front door. "There's more here than you expect. Is that a fingerprint thing?" Kane asked, voice low. Atsa didn't answer. She lifted her hand and pressed her palm flat to the scanner. It flashed red, then green. With a heavy, airtight hiss, the lock disengaged. The steel door eased open with a low moan like a breath held too long. They stood at the threshold, staring. Inside was a small chamber no bigger than a walk-in closet, but unlike the rest of the house, it was pristine. The walls were paneled in dark wood polished to a soft sheen. A narrow table stood in the center, and on it sat 3 large black boxes, each sealed, each labeled in gold leaf. One said Equity Holdings, the second said Property and Deeds, the third was simply personal. Atsa reached out and lifted the lid on the first. Inside were rows of folders, all neatly organized and marked. She pulled one. The top sheet was a quarterly dividend statement. Underneath, stock certificates, names she recognized even from a distance. Amazon, IBM, Apple, Johnson & Johnson. She flipped to the totals. Her mouth went dry. 7 figures. Then 8. Kane leaned over her shoulder and let out a strangled sound. Is that real?" Atsa didn't answer. She opened the second box. Inside were legal property deeds. One was for a commercial lot in Santa Fe. Another for a duplex in Phoenix. Another for acreage near Farmington. And the last one, the deed for the land they were standing on now. In Nellie's name. All of it legally transferred, notarized, and up to date. Kane backed up, looking around the room like it might vanish. This is like a movie. Like a secret inheritance in some rich guy's bunker. She wasn't rich, Atsa said slowly. She was smart, strategic. She turned to the third box. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Photos, letters, jewelry, a gold watch, an old cassette tape in a clear plastic case, a thin notebook, soft leather cover tied with red string. Atsa untied the knot and opened it. June 5th, 2001. Kenny said he wants me to take more control of the Santa Fe project. I told him I'm not a businesswoman. He laughed and said I've been running his house for 30 years. That's more skill than most execs in LA. He signed over 40%. I didn't ask. He said he wanted to, and he meant it. I never asked for anything. But he gave me something better than money. He gave me trust. Atsa stared at the handwriting. It was neat, precise, with a small curl to the letters that reminded her of Sunday school teachers. She turned the page. I made my own investments, too. I never wanted to rely on anyone's name but mine. This land, this house, these papers, they belong to my blood. They belong to Atsa. If she ever finds them, I want her to know I never stopped loving her mother. Or her. I just waited. I hope she knows what to do. Kane was quiet beside her. Atsa closed the notebook. The silence grew thick again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was awe. This is real, she whispered. Kane nodded. All of it. It's real. Atsa reached into the box and pulled out a ring, turquoise, set in heavy silver. She recognized it. Nellie had worn it in every photo. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Kane looked at her. What now? Atsa stepped out of the vault and looked around the basement, the shelves, the files, the waiting. I think we figure out what she left us. All of it. Not just the money. Kane tilted his head. What else is there? Atsa pointed toward the far corner where a locked cabinet sat bolted to the wall. She left stories, she said, and maybe some secrets. Kane smiled. Want me to go get the screwdriver? Atsa nodded. Outside, the wind had picked up again, scraping against the house in steady rhythm. The vault door stood open now. The house had waited long enough. Oh. We weren't poor because we were broken. We were poor because the door was locked, and now I have the key. Atsa sat on the edge of the old desk in the basement, her elbows resting on her knees, the vault door still open behind her, like a question that had finally found its answer. Her heart hadn't stopped pounding since she opened that third box. Her pulse felt like it lived in her throat now. Kane was crouched on the floor, sorting through ledgers and documents with the quiet awe of someone walking through a museum of buried power. Every sheet he unfolded revealed another piece of the impossible trust funds, real estate revenue, silent partnerships in development companies, investments that had been feeding off the stock market for decades. The numbers weren't just big, they were life-changing, world-changing. He held up a paper. This says one of the Phoenix properties is bringing in over $8,000 a month in rental income, and that's just one of them. Atsa didn't answer right away. Her brain was buzzing, the kind of buzzing that came not from panic, but from the weight of too much reality pressing in all at once. She rubbed her eyes and tried to make space in her mind for what this meant. She had spent every day of the last 10 years calculating what she could skip: groceries, gas, health insurance, heat. Every decision was weighed against what it would cost her tomorrow. There were no clean choices when survival was the only goal. Now she was sitting on top of a personal fortune. Not an inheritance. A legacy. Something built slowly and deliberately by a woman no one talked about. A woman who had worked behind the scenes for a famous man who'd used her role not just to serve but to build. Quietly, ruthlessly, carefully. I don't understand how no one knew, Kane said. Atsa looked at him. Because people don't see women like her, especially not indigenous women. People like Nellie. They're part of the background until they're gone. Then the silence feels too normal to question. Kane reached over and pulled another envelope from the back of the cabinet they'd just pried open. This one had a wax seal and a single word on the front. Legal. He passed it to her. Inside was a copy of Nellie's will. It was clear. Every asset, every holding, every deed was transferred to Atsa Marie Begay. Full ownership. No debt. No liens. Atsa read it twice before setting it down. It's all mine, she whispered. You mean ours, Kane said, giving her a lopsided smile. She let out a short laugh that almost turned into a sob. Yeah, ours. They sat in silence, the weight of everything they'd just uncovered pressing down like gravity had shifted in the room. What are we going to do? Kane asked. That question echoed louder than all the others. Atsa stood and paced the basement. Her fingers brushed across the top of the filing cabinet, the books, the edge of the vault door. She could feel the walls of her old life still clinging to her like dried skin. The instincts of hunger and fear didn't vanish just because money changed hands. But the truth was undeniable. They weren't poor anymore. They weren't scrambling. They weren't stuck. They were free. And freedom wasn't just walking away. It was choosing where to go. We don't tell anyone, Atsa said finally. Kane blinked. What? Not yet. Not the amount. Not the vault. Not the full story. This kind of money, it pulls attention. The wrong kind. We need to understand it before anyone else does. You think someone would try to take it? I think people do crazy things when they smell money. Especially money they think you don't deserve. Kane didn't argue. He just nodded slower this time. Atsa looked around the room. We go back to Gallup tomorrow. I want to meet with Howard Chi in person. He needs to help us structure this right. Trusts, protections, paperwork. Everything needs to be airtight. What about the house? We lock it up. We make it look quiet. She paused, then turned back to the vault. The door still hung open. She stared at it for a long moment, then pushed it shut until it sealed with a hiss. A coded lock reset with a soft beep. Then she turned off the basement light. That night, neither of them slept. The storm of what-ifs kept battering Atsa from all directions. What if someone tried to challenge the will? What if someone from Kenny Rogers' family found out and claimed foul play? What if there were taxes she didn't understand, or loopholes or debts hidden somewhere beneath all the gold and documents? But even through all the fear, a slow fire was starting to burn in her. Not the kind that consumed, the kind that built. By the time dawn broke over the mesa, she knew what she had to do. They packed the truck and left before full daylight. As they pulled away, Atsa looked at the house in the rearview mirror. It still looked like a memory from someone else's life. They arrived in Gallup just after 10. Atsa didn't even stop at the trailer. She drove straight to the law office. Howard Chi was waiting. He was younger than she expected, mid-40s, sharp suit, braided hair tucked over one shoulder. His handshake was firm, his eyes alert. I was wondering when you'd call, he said, as he motioned them into his office. Atsa didn't bother with small talk. She handed him the sealed envelope with the copies of everything she'd found, the will, the investment statements, the property deeds. Chi read in silence for several minutes, flipping through pages with increasing speed. When he finally looked up, he gave her a look she'd never seen from a lawyer before. Respect. This is substantial, he said, and airtight. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. Then help me protect it, Atsa said. I don't want to show up on a list. I don't want to be a target. I want this secured for me, for my son, and for whatever she intended it to do. Chi nodded. We'll need a trust, a private one. I have a financial advisor I trust. Quiet, discreet. We'll keep the assets diversified and split. Real estate, liquid cash, long-term funds. It'll take time. I can give you time, she said. Just don't lose any of it. Kane shifted in his chair. Are we going to be okay? Atsa turned to him. We're going to be more than okay, she said. As they left the law office, the sunlight hit them full in the face. For the first time in years, Atsa didn't squint. She let it burn. She was poor yesterday. She was still tired, still cautious, still watching the world like it might take something from her. But something had shifted. Not the world. Her place in it. She could feel Nellie in her blood, steady, silent, unbending. The door had always been locked. But now Atsa held the key. She didn't just leave me a fortune, she left me a story no one wanted told. The old reservation radio was playing quietly in the corner of Elba's kitchen, half static, half soft guitar. Atsa sat at the table with a cup of black coffee growing cold between her hands. The paperwork from Chi's office laid out in front of her like puzzle pieces. Kane was outside throwing a basketball against the side of the trailer. Thud, thud, thud. The rhythm of a boy trying not to ask questions he wasn't ready to have answered. Across from her, Elba narrowed her eyes at the paper she was holding. This says commercial property near downtown Phoenix. And this, she tapped another document, is just interest income from a trust. Yes. Atsa said, her voice tight. Jesus. She didn't put it in a bank account. She layered everything. Elba leaned back in her chair, staring at her niece like she'd grown a second head. How did your mother never mention any of this? Atsa exhaled, slow and tired. She cut Nellie off. Said she married a white man. Said she chose that life. Never explained. Just silence. Your mother was hard. She was scared. Elba's expression didn't soften. Same thing most times. The silence between them sat thick, but not unfriendly. The kind of silence that came after too many truths and too little time. She left it all to you, Elba asked finally. Yes. Every part of it. And you're going back. Atsa nodded. There's more there. I don't just mean money. There are stories buried in that house. Photos, journals, letters. I think she meant for me to understand why she did it this way. Why she waited. Elba pushed the papers aside. Then you better be ready. Some ghosts aren't gentle. I don't want gentle, I want the truth. Outside, the basketball bounced once more and rolled away. Kane yelled out, chasing it down the gravel drive. Elba stood and poured herself more coffee. You still have family over near Shiprock? Old ones. The kind who remember things they're not supposed to talk about. You ever hear the name Clara Yazzie? Atsa frowned. No. She worked with Nellie at the ranch back when Kenny was still living out there full-time. Word was Clara kept the books while Nellie handled the household. I heard she's still around. Can you help me find her? I'll make a call. But be careful. Clara doesn't just tell things. She makes you earn it. I've earned enough. Elba gave her a long look. No, baby. What you've done is survive. Earning something comes after surviving. That evening they drove back to the estate. The house was as they'd left it. Still. Watching. As if it had memorized the shape of their steps. Atsa unlocked the front door and walked in with the ease of someone who no longer felt like a visitor. Kane followed close, lugging in his duffel and dropping it at the foot of the stairs. You think we're going to stay here now? He asked. For a while. He looked up the staircase. Kinda weird, but cool. Atsa didn't answer. Her mind was already pulling her back to the vault, the desk, the basement. Everything she hadn't yet opened. There was still one drawer locked tight with no key. One box labeled for her eyes only in Nellie's careful handwriting. Atsa hadn't dared crack it yet. Something told her that once she did, the entire narrative might shift. She needed to talk to Clara Yazzie first. The next morning, Elba called. She'll meet you. Today, 11 o'clock. You know the Tseda Ka'an chapter house? Yeah. She's across from it. Old red trailer with a green roof. Don't be late. By 10:30, Atsa and Kane were on the road. The horizon stretched wide with the burn of autumn sun, the wind slicing sideways off the cliffs. They pulled up to the trailer with 5 minutes to spare. A wind chime tinkled above the door. Clara Yazzie answered before they knocked. She was in her 70s, maybe older, dressed in a navy skirt and an old University of New Mexico sweatshirt. Her silver hair was braided down her back, and her eyes were sharp, cut glass sharp. She looked Atsa up and down once, then opened the door wide. You're Nellie's girl, she said. Atsa stepped inside. Granddaughter. Still hers. The trailer smelled like cedar and black tea. Clara motioned to the kitchen table already set with 3 mugs. Kane sat silently beside his mother. Clara moved with slow precision, pouring hot water, placing sugar on the side without being asked. "Your grandmother," she said, settling into her chair, "was the smartest woman I ever knew." Atsa nodded. She didn't seem to want people to know it. Clara smiled without warmth. No, she didn't. Because smart women, especially brown women, pay for being known. Atsa felt something click behind her ribs. "She worked for Kenny Rogers," she asked. "She did. But it wasn't like people think. She wasn't cleaning his house, not really. She managed his estate, managed him most days. He trusted her with everything, and she stayed hidden. Her choice. Kenny offered to put her on payroll to make it public. She said no. Said she didn't need the world to clap for her to know her worth." Kane spoke for the first time. Why didn't she tell anyone what she was building? Clara looked at him. Because she knew the moment people found out, they'd say it was his money. That she hadn't earned it. Even if she ran every number, placed every investment, built every property, she didn't want it questioned. So she kept quiet. Until now. Atsa sat forward. "Why now?" Clara's eyes glinted. "Because she knew you'd survive. And once you did, you'd be strong enough to carry the truth." She reached beneath the table and pulled out a small wooden box. Old. Sanded smooth. No lock. Inside were photographs. Dozens. Nellie and Clara with blueprints. Nellie sitting in a boardroom. Nellie beside Kenny with a ledger in her lap. Nellie in Phoenix marking a construction site. Nellie in court speaking with an attorney. All dated. All time-stamped. All proof. Atsa's hands shook as she flipped through them. "She was never invisible," Clara said. "Just quiet." "That's different." "I want to tell her story," Atsa whispered. Clara nodded. "Then tell it right. Don't make her a shadow." As they left, Clara stood in the doorway and called out, "Your mother wasn't wrong to be angry, but she was wrong to forget. Don't forget." Back in the truck, Kane held one of the photos in his lap. "You think people will believe it? They will," Atsa said, "because I'm going to show them." The wind pushed across the valley as they drove home, the road winding like memory. Atsa didn't know what would come next, but she knew now why Nellie had chosen her. Not because of blood, because she was the one who wouldn't let it all be erased. She didn't just inherit a fortune, she inherited a fight. She built in silence what the world tried to erase. Now it's my turn to make noise. The local reporter arrived in a blue Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a camera bag slung over one shoulder. Atsa spotted her from the second-story window and watched her step out into the hard-packed dirt, like someone who hadn't been this far off paved roads in a long time. The woman waved. Atsa didn't wave back. Kane leaned on the windowsill beside her. "You sure about this?" Atsa said, grabbing her grandmother's turquoise ring from the dresser and slipping it on. "But I'm done hiding." The living room was cleared of the sheet-covered furniture now. Dust had been swept. The light came in clean through the windows. Atsa had hung 4 photos behind the couch, carefully chosen ones. Nellie in Phoenix with blueprints. Nellie beside a smiling Kenny Rogers in a denim jacket. Nellie on horseback, eyes bright. And one black and white photo, just Nellie alone in front of the house when it was still being built, young, steady, and looking dead into the lens, like she could see the future coming and wasn't afraid of it. The reporter knocked at exactly 10. "June Valencia," she said as Atsa opened the door. "Santa Fe Independent. Thanks for agreeing to meet." "Come in," Atsa said. "But this story doesn't leave here unless it's told right." June hesitated, then stepped inside her boots, squeaking slightly on the tile. Understood. You said over the phone this was about a woman named Nellie Begay. She was my grandmother. She passed last year. June nodded and opened her notebook. And you've recently inherited her estate. Atsa met her eyes. More than that. They sat down across from each other at the dining table. Kane lingered nearby, arms folded, not speaking but listening to every word. June clicked on her recorder. Okay. Start from the beginning. Atsa took a deep breath. She was born on the Res. Grew up speaking Diné, first English second. She left school at 15 to take care of her brothers. Moved to Albuquerque at 18. Met Kenny Rogers when she was 22, working at a hotel he stayed at during a tour stop. He asked her if she knew where to find good green chili. She told him she made the best in the state. He said, "Prove it." She paused. June scribbled. She cooked for him. He hired her. First as a housekeeper, then over time as more how she managed his estate, oversaw the build on this house, invested every bonus he gave her, bought properties, stocks, managed ranches under his name, then quietly under her own. He trusted her more than his lawyers. She never wanted to be in the spotlight. She just wanted control. June looked up. And you can prove this. Atsa slid a file folder across the table. Inside were photos, ledgers, notarized documents, and letters in Kenny's handwriting, naming Nellie as executor on multiple projects. The woman's eyebrows climbed as she turned the pages. Why are you coming forward now? Because no one else will. June leaned back, processing. You're saying a Navajo woman built a multi-million-dollar portfolio in partnership with Kenny Rogers, stayed invisible on purpose, and left it all to you. I'm saying that's exactly what happened. The reporter was silent for a long beat. Then she said, almost cautiously, "You know, this is going to stir things up. His family, his fans, they might not believe it. I don't care if they believe it. I care that it's true. What do you want the public to take away from this?" Atsa's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. That power doesn't always look the way you expect. That sometimes the people you ignore are building empires in the background. She was invisible because she had to be. I'm not. Not anymore. June nodded slowly. And the estate? What will you do with it? Atsa exhaled. I'm turning the house into a museum, one that tells the truth. About her. About him. About what it means to build something in a world that wasn't built for you. Kane grinned faintly from the corner, and Atsa glanced at him, heart steady now. June stood and offered her hand. I'll write it like you said it. But just know, once this goes out, there's no going back. Atsa shook her hand. I know. By evening, the story was already moving. First, it hit the local paper. Then the online buzz began. Asta didn't have social media, but Kane did, and his phone started blowing up with alerts before sunset. By nightfall, her name was trending in the region. Indigenous woman inherits Kenny Rogers' estate was the sanitized version, but others dug deeper. Secret life of Navajo housekeeper revealed was one headline. Was Kenny Rogers hiding a second family was another. She shut the laptop after the first hour. Elba called, voice low but proud. You started something, baby. Don't let them bend it. Clara Yazzie sent a text, she'd be proud. Now keep going. Atsa didn't sleep. Not because of fear, because of noise. The world once silent to her that was now speaking her name. By morning, the calls started. A representative from a national talk show. Then a letter from a member of Kenny Rogers' extended family, thinly veiled in polite disbelief, but clearly laced with accusation. Howard Chi came up from Gallup in person. "We expected this," he said, sipping bitter coffee in the kitchen. "I can shield most of it. But if you want to go public like this, you need legal defense. You need to think like a public figure." "I don't want fame," Atsa said. "But you lit a fuse. The fire comes with it. I want protection." "Not for me." She glanced toward Kane, who was reading quietly on the couch for him. Chi nodded. "We'll set up a communications rep. You'll need a press plan. And more importantly, a platform. You want to do something with this museum. You need allies." That night she stood on the front porch of the house, the sky open wide with stars. The wind moved across the land in long, soft waves. Behind her the house pulsed with quiet memory. She thought of Nellie, how she'd kept it all hidden. Not because she was ashamed, but because she was waiting. And now Atsa knew what she had to do. Not just protect it. Not just prove it. She had to fight for it. Tell it. Build from it. This wasn't just inheritance. It was reclamation. They don't care how hard she worked. They care that someone like me ended up with everything they think should have been theirs. The letter was printed on thick ivory stock, heavy with the stink of condescension. Atsa read it once, then again. She let it sit on the kitchen table under the weight of her coffee mug, as if trapping it might keep the words from slithering out into her day. It had come by courier that morning. No return address, just the name of the firm embossed in clean gold script. Inside, a sharply worded request, demand really for clarity around the nature of Nellie Begay's legal relationship with Kenneth Ray Rogers, deceased. Words like impropriety, misrepresentation, and posthumous defamation littered the page, thin ice covered in velvet. Kane walked in and tossed his hoodie over a chair, mail. She pushed the letter across the table. He read a few lines and frowned. "So, they think you—" "What stole it or manipulated him," Atsa said, bitterness creeping into her voice. "Or maybe they think she did. A brown woman couldn't possibly have earned it. It had to be a scheme." Kane sank into the chair opposite her. "Do we need to worry? We need to be ready." Chi had warned her it might happen. The moment you go public with a story, the world isn't used to hearing. The world tries to twist it into something easier to digest, preferably with villains. The legal pressure had arrived faster than she expected. She emailed the letter to Chi, then stood too restless to sit. The air outside the house had thickened with late October wind. Leaves skittered across the long drive, tumbling toward the gate, where reporters still hovered in rental cars. The gate remained locked, but curiosity seeped through fences. Always did. She walked into the library, a room she'd avoided until now. Nellie had filled it with books in both English and Diné. History, law, business. On one wall, a black and white portrait of a young Diné woman on horseback hung beside a small framed headline from the Gallup Sun, a feature on local female entrepreneurs. Nellie's name was mentioned briefly. One paragraph. Atsa ran her fingers along the shelves. A folder labeled Tax Records, 1991-2015, sat beside a set of ledgers wrapped in twine. Every document she opened was precise, clean, legal. Her grandmother hadn't just been smart. She'd been prepared. There was no fraud here, no scandal, no loophole. Only the stubborn, quiet brilliance of a woman who knew the world didn't give second chances. So she'd built her own first one and handed it to her granddaughter. The doorbell rang. She froze. Then it rang again. She checked the camera's standard security now wired in through Chi's contacts. Not a reporter. A woman in her 50s, long gray hair in a single thick braid, a shawl pulled tight over her shoulders. No car, just dust on her boots and a tired patience in her eyes. Atsa opened the door. "I'm looking for Nellie's granddaughter," the woman said. "That's me. I'm Elsie Rogers." The name landed like thunder inside her chest. "You're Kenny's niece." They stared at each other for a long moment. Atsa gestured. "You want to come in?" Elsie stepped across the threshold like someone used to doing hard things quietly. They sat at the kitchen table across from each other like a mirror cracked down the middle. Elsie studied the space eyes lingering on the photos above the fireplace. She loved this house, she said. Even after he sold it, she called it home. She never said much about him, Atsa replied. Not in words. She didn't have to. Atsa waited. Elsie looked down at her hands. "I didn't come here to challenge you. Your lawyers did. I didn't send them." Atsa raised an eyebrow. Elsie took a breath. "My brother was a complicated man. He loved big, lived fast, trusted the wrong people. But he trusted Nellie until the day he died. That means something." "Then why the letter?" "Because some people in the family can't handle the idea that everything they assumed was theirs never had their name on it." Atsa crossed her arms. "They didn't know her. I did, and I barely understood the surface." Elsie nodded slowly. She wasn't flashy. She didn't talk much about herself. But when Kenny had his first cancer scare, she was the one he called. When he divorced the second time, she was the one who moved back in for 6 months to help. When he needed advice on buying that studio in Austin, she ran the numbers. She helped him more than any of us. Then why did he never say that? Because the world didn't want that story. And now Elsie's eyes lifted to hers. Now the world has no choice. Atsa studied her for a long moment. "You could have come with a threat. Or a lawyer. You didn't." "I came with a story," Elsie said. "And maybe with an apology. For staying quiet." She reached into her coat and pulled out a letter. Old. Yellowed. The envelope brittle. He wrote it after his last tour. "Gave it to me in case anything happened. I forgot about it until I saw your face on the news." Atsa took it carefully. It was addressed to the girl Nellie raised in her heart, even if not in her arms. Inside a single page in Kenny's loopy, all-cap handwriting. "If you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to explain it myself. Nellie wasn't just the best thing that ever happened to my house. She was the best person I ever trusted. Every business deal that worked, she ran behind the scenes. She didn't want the credit. Said it was enough that she knew. If she left it to you, then you're the right one. Don't let them twist it. Don't let them bury her. And don't shrink yourself just because they can't see past her skin." Atsa felt the tears sting, but she didn't let them fall. Elsie stood to leave. "You'll win this, you know. I don't want to win. I want her name spoken right." She picked the right one to carry it. Atsa walked her out. As Elsie disappeared down the dirt road, Atsa stood in the doorway holding the letter, holding the storm. Inside the house, her phone buzzed. Another news outlet. Another request for an interview. She picked it up and answered. "This is Atsa Marie Begay. I'm ready to talk." She left me her silence, but I turned it into a voice. The studio lights burned down on Atsa's skin, but she didn't flinch. The room was quiet except for the gentle hum of the cameras and the low rustle of producers shifting behind the scenes. She sat on a stool in the center of the minimalist set. Her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. Turquoise ring catching the overhead glare. The interviewer, a polished man in his 60s with a warm baritone and network news charm, leaned slightly toward her. "You've shaken a lot of people with this story, Ms. Begay," he said. "But the way you tell it, it's not just about money." "It never was," Atsa said. "It's about erasure and reclamation." He nodded, impressed. "Let's go back. You've described your grandmother, Nellie Begay, as the architect behind a quiet empire. But there's very little public record of her contributions. Why do you think that is?" Atsa met the camera with steady eyes. "Because the world rewards visibility, not value. And she knew that visibility for a native woman came with cost, scrutiny, disbelief. So she built in the shadows. She learned to wield silence like a weapon. But she kept receipts. She knew one day someone would need to speak for her. And that person was you." "Yes," Atsa said, "because I know what it's like to be invisible until someone needs a headline." There was a beat of silence in the studio. Then the interviewer smiled. "That's powerful. What has the response been like from the Rogers family?" Atsa kept her face calm, her voice even. "Mixed. One of them came here, Elsie Rogers. She came with grace and truth. She brought a letter Kenny wrote before he died. That letter said everything I needed to know about where he stood. But some of the others, they came with lawyers." The interviewer raised an eyebrow. "And what do those lawyers want? To rewrite the ending," she said simply. "But I won't let them." He leaned forward, a little more serious now. "You've become a voice for Indigenous legacy and visibility, not just in this case, but nationally. Was that your intention?" "No," she said. "My intention was to survive. Then I found out I'd been left a life my grandmother built quietly, meticulously, with the kind of brilliance no one gave her credit for. And once I had that story, I couldn't stay silent. Not when so many others like her are still erased." They paused for a brief cutaway, and a production assistant offered her water. She took it, grateful for the moment to breathe. The chair beneath her felt stiff now, not from nerves, but from the tension of keeping herself steady under scrutiny. The interview resumed. "What do you plan to do with the estate now I'm opening the house as a museum? Not just for Nellie or Kenny. For women who held their communities together without applause. For every child who grows up thinking wealth, power, and legacy are things that only belong to a different kind of name." The interviewer nodded slowly. "That's a bold vision. It's a necessary one." When the segment ended, applause rose from the small studio crew. Atsa offered a nod, then quietly gathered her things. The cameras turned off, but the buzz around her didn't fade. Backstage, Kane waited with a proud grin. "You didn't blink once," he said. She smiled. "I didn't have the luxury." They walked together through the building and out into the sunlight. A group of college students recognized her outside the studio gates, 2 Dene girls and 1 black teenager with a press pass. They didn't ask for autographs. Just stood there, beaming, one of them quietly saying, "Thank you for saying it." Atsa reached out and touched her hand. "Thank you for hearing it." They drove back to the estate in silence, the desert unspooling around them in long, golden stretches. She stared out the window, thinking about the road behind and the wait ahead. By the time they pulled into the drive, a new car was parked by the gate. Not a reporter's car this time. Sleek, expensive black. Chi stood on the porch, already waiting for them. He nodded toward the car. "He's here," he said. "Who? Carter Lyman, executor of Rogers' posthumous brand holdings." "What does he want?" Chi's jaw tightened. "To negotiate." Inside the house, the man stood in the library, flipping slowly through a binder of photos Atsa had placed for the museum exhibit. He wore a tailored gray suit, no tie with gold cufflinks, and the air of a man who liked owning outcomes. When Atsa entered, he looked up and extended a hand. Ms. Begay, thank you for seeing me. She didn't shake it. You have 10 minutes. He smiled, unfazed. I represent the Rogers Estate's remaining branding interests. Albums, image licensing, posthumous deals. The family's concerned about how recent publicity could affect Kenny's legacy. She folded her arms. You mean his real legacy? He tilted his head. No disrespect. I'm here to propose a solution. I don't need a solution. I have the truth. Carter walked slowly around the room, gaze landing on Nellie's portrait above the fireplace. She was remarkable, he said. The documents, the partnerships, the property deeds, they speak volumes. And I have no intention of discrediting that. But we'd like to keep the narrative streamlined. Streamlined, clean, marketable, nostalgic. Whitewashed, Atsa corrected. He didn't flinch. We're prepared to offer a settlement, a foundation grant, licensing revenue. We'll back the museum financially, publicly, even help expand it, if you agree to frame her role as private informal. She built the damn house, Atsa said, stepping forward. She ran his investments. She was his legacy. She wasn't his wife. She didn't need to be. They stared at each other. Then she leaned in slightly. She wasn't the shadow. She was the spine. Carter blinked. I'm not selling her silence, she said, and I'm not bartering her brilliance. You can walk out of this house and tell the board you tried. He hesitated, searching for a soft spot, but there was none. When he left, Kane watched him from the window. You think he'll come back? Not alone. She turned back toward the vault door in the hallway. Inside it waited more than papers. It waited for justice, and she wasn't done speaking. The truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a witness. Atsa lit the bundle of cedar and waved it over the threshold of the old master bedroom. The museum contractor, a quiet Diné woman named Taya, stood respectfully behind, her hands clasped. The scent curled into the corners, lifting the room into something sacred again. The house was no longer just a house. The first gallery was nearly finished, walls painted a warm, earthy adobe tone, hardwood floors buffed clean. A massive archival photo of Nellie on horseback stretched across one wall, and beneath it a glass case waited for her ring. Her first ledger and the handwritten list of her investment properties. Each item had been chosen with intention. Each one whispered a fuller story. Taya knelt beside a box labeled Nellie's Office, Originals, and carefully pulled out a black and white photo of Kenny and Nellie laughing beside a muddy pickup truck, sleeves rolled, hair windblown. This one, she said, holding it up. This one should go near the entrance. Atsa stepped closer and nodded. Put it next to her journal, the entry where she says he trusted her more than his accountants. Taya smiled. That'll start the right conversation. They worked in near silence for hours, framing measuring cleaning glass. Atsa found herself sliding between exhaustion and adrenaline. The legal threats hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown louder, more carefully, worded more manipulative. But something had shifted. She wasn't trying to defend Nellie anymore. She was honoring her. And the louder the pushback, the clearer her mission became. By late afternoon, Kane returned from school and came straight into the gallery, backpack slung low. Reporters are outside again, he said, tossing the bag down. One of them said, you're on the short list for that American Legacy Award or whatever. Atsa raised an eyebrow. Is that even a real thing? He shrugged. Sounded fancy. Taya laughed softly and turned back to her level. I don't care about awards, Atsa said. I care about the grandmas who walk in here and see themselves for the first time. Kane looked around the room and nodded toward one wall. You put up the photo of her cooking, yeah? The one where she's holding a phone with one hand and stirring chili with the other. It's what Elba said. She multitasked a $1 million empire while making fry bread. Kane grinned. That's the one. Just then a knock sounded at the side door. Atsa's stomach tightened, instinct still slow to trust. She wiped her hands and stepped down the hallway. It was Clara Yazzie. She stood there in her long skirt and wool coat, her silver braid brushing her back. No smile, just steady eyes. I brought something, she said, and stepped inside without waiting for permission. They sat in the dining room while Kane helped Taya finish setting up the gallery lighting. Clara placed an envelope on the table, weathered and bound with twine. This was Nellie's, she said. She gave it to me before she got sick. Said it wasn't time yet, that I'd know when it was. Atsa untied the string slowly. Inside were letters, all handwritten, all addressed to names she didn't recognize, except for one to the woman who never knew how powerful she was. The letter was short. I spent my whole life doing the work that got no credit. I didn't need it, credit was never the point. But you do. You need the world to know your voice matters. So take mine. Use it. And don't be afraid to take up space. Atsa felt her throat close. She handed the letter to Clara, who didn't read it. She already knew what it said. I think you should publish them, Clara said. Her words, her story. Not watered down. Not polished for anyone else's comfort. She didn't want fame. No. But she wanted the truth carried. And now you're the carrier. That night, Atsa sat in her grandmother's old reading chair. The letters spread across the floor like a mosaic of memory. Each one was a thread in a larger web, investments negotiations, advice, quiet warnings to other Indigenous women about what to watch out for, who to avoid, how to keep your name on the deed when they try to write you out. Nellie had been teaching all along. Whispered mentorship. Survival passed in handwriting. Kane curled up nearby with a blanket, half asleep. Atsa picked up one of the letters and read it aloud. Don't let them tell you you're too loud, too proud, too complicated. They said the same to me. I smiled and bought their land. The next morning, she called June Valencia from the Santa Fe Independent. I want to publish a collection, she said. Letters, photos, annotations. Her story in her words. Not just mine. June didn't hesitate. Let's do it. By the end of the week, 3 publishers had reached out. One of them offered a 6-figure advance. Another offered complete creative control. She didn't say yes to any of them. Not yet. Instead, she called Elsie Rogers. I need your help, she said. I want to publish this without compromise. And I want the Rogers estate to support it, not for my sake, for hers. Elsie answered without pause. You've got my name. I'll get the board. Atsa hung up and turned toward the vault once more. There was one last box. She'd avoided it this whole time. She knelt in front of the cabinet and opened it slowly. Inside was a single tape recorder, a stack of cassettes, and a note in Nellie's scrawled writing. My voice. In case yours ever needs backup. She hit play. Nellie's voice poured into the room, low, calm, edged with desert sun. People always asked me why I stayed quiet. But baby, I wasn't quiet. I was recording. Atsa pressed her hand to her mouth. The world hadn't just lost Nellie B. Gay. It had missed her. And now they'd finally hear her. They tried to write her out of the story, so I carved her name into the foundation. Rain fell on the desert like it hadn't in months, steady cold and cleansing. The museum's front steps glistened beneath the clouded sky as volunteers hurried inside, carrying the last of the framed exhibits wrapped in plastic. The grand opening was 2 days away, and tension twisted through Otsa's shoulders with every breath. Inside the main gallery, soft overhead lights hummed, and the scent of cedar still lingered from the morning blessing. Taya was adjusting the final placement of the dedication plaque, her movements precise, reverent. Clara Yazzie stood nearby, arms folded across her chest, her eyes not missing a single detail. "It's ready," Clara said. "This isn't just a space. It's a story stitched into walls." Otsa ran her fingers across the glass case nearest to her. Inside lay Nellie's last ledger, opened to a page with handwritten notes in blue ink. Neat, firm strokes, the kind that made numbers look like poetry. "She wouldn't have wanted a statue," Otsa said quietly. "She would have wanted people to learn what she knew, to pass it on." Clara gave a slow nod. "Then you built it right." Otsa exhaled through her nose. Her stomach still churned. The legal threats had slowed since Elsie stepped in and forced the Rogers board into silence, but not everyone had accepted the truth. The tabloids still circled like buzzards. Online forums buzzed with conspiracy and contempt. One blogger claimed Nellie was a glorified maid who had taken advantage of an aging country star. Another said the museum was a scam to rewrite history. But every time the world shouted, Otsa answered with receipts, recordings, and resolve. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what it means to own a legacy." Clara turned toward her. "I used to think it was something passed down like a quilt. You just hold it, care for it. But I think now, you have to fight for it. Stitch it tighter. Patch the places where the world tried to tear it." "Legacy isn't given," Clara said. "It's protected." Just then Kane burst into the gallery, his wet hoodie dripping rain on the polished floor. "There's a woman at the gate," he said. "She says she knew Nellie. Won't give a name. But she's holding a box and said you'd want to see it." Otsa felt a flicker of something ancient, a memory not hers, but familiar. She followed him down the hallway, past exhibits and panels, past Nellie's own voice playing softly in one of the audio alcoves. Outside, beneath a wide umbrella, stood a woman no taller than Otsa's shoulder, her face hidden beneath the rim of a battered hat. Her hands, aged and dark, cradled a cardboard box wrapped in thick twine. Otsa stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" The woman looked up. Her face was lean, marked by time, her eyes sharp with something that felt like warning and remembrance all at once. "You're Nellie's girl," she said. "Yes, I worked with her, back before anyone knew her name." The woman pushed the box toward her. "She said someone would come asking. I thought it'd be sooner. I thought it might be her." Otsa took the box. It was heavier than it looked. "She told me not to speak unless the truth was in danger," the woman said. "And now I see it is." Inside the museum, they opened the box on the long community table just inside the second gallery. The woman sat silently as Otsa peeled back the layers of paper. Inside were records, property documents, blueprints, audio cassettes, labeled in Nellie's handwriting, studio purchase Nashville. Tax dispute strategy, 1993. Kenny final estate plans, personal copy. And photos, hundreds of them. Nellie in meetings. Nellie at a film shoot. Nellie at the governor's table in Santa Fe, shaking hands with state leaders. In every photo, she wasn't in the background. She was leading. She told people she was just managing household bills, the woman said. Truth was, she kept some of Kenny's biggest deals from sinking. She ghostwrote half the letters his office sent. Otsa stared at the papers. "These show she was more than just his estate manager," she whispered. "She was the estate," the woman said. He just sang. She made sure the empire stayed standing. Taya stepped beside them, quiet reverence in her stance. We need to scan and archive all of this immediately. Atsa nodded. And we're building a second wing. These go there. That night after the woman had left without leaving her name, Atsa sat at her grandmother's desk, fingers resting on a sheet of foolscap, from 1995 Nellie's handwriting, dancing across the page in a script that said everything and explained nothing. She thought of how the world measured worth. In plaques, in headlines, in estates notarized with gold. But Nellie had measured it in something else quiet. Impact lives, protected deals made in whispers that shaped generations. Atsa pulled out her notebook and began to write a new panel for the exhibit. She didn't quote Kenny Rogers. She didn't mention fame. She wrote, "She wasn't invisible. You just didn't look close enough. She wasn't quiet. You just didn't listen long enough. She wasn't in the background. She was the author." The next morning, she woke to an inbox full of messages. One was from the Library of Congress. They wanted to acquire Nellie's collection for their Indigenous Women in Business archive. Another was from the New York Times, requesting a long-form piece on Nellie's legacy. The final message was a video attachment. She opened it. It was a clip of Kenny Rogers speaking at a private awards dinner years ago. Grainy video. But his voice was clear. They ask me all the time who I owe my success to. The truth is, it wasn't a manager or a label. It was a woman named Nellie Begay. You don't know her. You should. She saved me from losing everything twice, and I'll never be able to repay that. The camera zoomed in on his face. She said, "Legacy isn't about applause. It's about making sure the people behind you have a path forward." That's her gift. That's her story. Atsa closed the laptop and looked out over the gallery. She didn't need applause either. But the doors were opening soon, and the world was finally coming in. When the doors opened, it wasn't just to the house, it was to the truth. And once truth steps into the light, it doesn't go back. The sun rose slow and gold over the Sangre de Cristos, bleeding color into the high desert sky. The gravel in the museum's long front drive crunched under the tires of the first cars. Volunteers bustled between folding tables and parking guides, their breath fogging in the crisp morning air. Atsa stood on the second-floor balcony of the house-turned museum, wrapped in her grandmother's old woven shawl. She watched the line of visitors snake out past the adobe wall down the sloped driveway and curl around the arroyo. Some clutched program guides. Others just stood silently, hands in their pockets, waiting to enter a place that had already started to hum with its own kind of sacred weight. Inside, the museum breathed like a living body. Taya checked the final audio loops, walking the halls barefoot for grounding. Clara made coffee in the kitchen for the staff, black strong with cinnamon, the way Nellie used to brew it. Kane adjusted the mic at the small press podium, fidgeting with the collar of his ironed shirt. Atsa stepped back inside and moved quietly down the hallway. Her grandmother's voice, crackling warm recorded, drifted softly from the main gallery speakers. "If you're gonna leave behind a story, make sure it's one your people can carry, not just with their minds, but with their chests." The museum wasn't grand. It wasn't designed to dazzle. It was built to remember, to show, to name. The first exhibit wall bore a quote carved in steel. Nellie Begay didn't change history by accident. She changed it with purpose. And when they tried to bury her name, they forgot she left it in ink and land in every deal signed with her steady hand. As the first guests were ushered in, Atsa stood beside the entrance to the legacy wing. She didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. People stopped in front of Nellie's ledger and whispered to each other. An elderly Navajo couple held hands while looking at the studio contracts. A black mother and her daughter stood in front of the letters Nellie wrote to other Indigenous women guides to holding power in quiet, calculated ways. Atsa stepped aside as Clara walked over holding a program booklet and 2 cups of coffee. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Clara said. "They're not just looking," Atsa said. "They're recognizing." Taya approached next, eyes wet but bright. "That woman who just left the vault exhibit? She told me she's a law student from Chinle. Said she never knew someone like Nellie even existed. Now she's thinking about switching to estate law." Clara smiled. "One spark is all it takes." Throughout the day, the house stayed full. Atsa watched quietly, answering questions when asked, but mostly letting the space speak for itself. The people brought their own meaning. That was the point. Mid-afternoon, a group of high school students gathered around the photo of Nellie and Kenny laughing beside the truck. One of the boys turned to his teacher and said, "Why didn't we ever learn about her in class?" The teacher hesitated. "Because she wasn't in the books." "Then put her in." Simple as that. Late in the day, after the final tour, and the press had packed up, Atsa walked out to the porch alone. The light had shifted again, softer golden, casting long shadows across the dirt. The mountains stood tall and watchful on the horizon. Kane joined her after a while, holding a bowl of leftover stew and 2 spoons. "I know you haven't eaten," he said, handing her one. She smiled and took it. "I forgot what it felt like to breathe." He sat beside her, stretching his legs. "You did it. We did it." He nudged her shoulder gently. "I was thinking about something you said. About owning a legacy. About protecting it." "Yeah. Well, you also extended it." She turned to him, spoon halfway to her mouth. "People are walking out of here today with a story they didn't have yesterday," he said. "That story's going to change something. That means it didn't end with her. It's moving, living. That's more than legacy. That's momentum." The sky cracked open with a distant roll of thunder. Atsa leaned back and exhaled slowly. "I used to think inheritance was something static," she said. "Money. Property. Maybe a house, but now—" She paused, heart full to the edges. "Now I think it's every act of survival she stitched into me. Every time she told me to keep my chin up, even when I had to cry on the bus ride home. Every time she showed me how to make decisions that echoed even if no one noticed right away." Kane nodded. "And now people notice." A gust of wind blew through the porch posts, rustling the prayer ties Clara had strung earlier. Atsa rose and walked back inside. The lights had dimmed. The last guests had gone. The air smelled of cedar and old wood, and something else, something warm, alive. She paused by the final exhibit, the one she hadn't let anyone else install. A mirror. Nothing else. Just a mirror surrounded by words etched into the frame. "You are the story. You are the proof. You are the legacy continuing." She looked into her own eyes and saw her grandmother staring back, not as a ghost, but as a guide. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the small turquoise ring, and slid it onto her finger. Then she flipped the open sign back to closed. But only for tonight. The house would open again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day forward until there was no one left who doubted that Nellie Begay had lived, built, and mattered more than any history book ever allowed. The silence was over. The doors were open, and the world was finally listening.